So, what's your reputation? Do you know? Everyone's got a reputation, whether we know it or not, or whether we like it or not, right? We all have a reputation. Some have a reputation for being generous. Others are known for their caution. Some people are seen as being kind and easygoing. Others might have a reputation for being a bit more prickly, a little bit more difficult. Some people have a reputation of being competent and visionary. Others are known more for their compassion and grace. Some of us work hard to burnish our reputations. Others say, well, I don't really care all that much. After all, what can you do about what others will think of you? I think the truth is that all of us have a need, an innate need to be recognized by someone. We depend on someone other than ourselves to give a sense of worth to us, right? We have that need. In his book, Raising Abel, the Catholic theologian James Allison explores this concept of reputation and shame. And in that book, he points out that the Greek word doxa, which is usually translated as glory, can also be translated as reputation. Glory, reputation. So he translates a part of the Gospel of John to make his point. John chapter 5, verses 41 to 44, usually is read this way: I do not accept glory from human beings, but I know that you don't have the love of God in you. I've come from my Father's name. I've come in my Father's name, and you don't accept me. If another comes in his own name, you will accept him. How can you believe when you accept glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the one who alone is God? Now, if you're kind of mixed up about glory and how do we accept glory, read the passage if we take Allison's point that the word glory and reputation can be similar in translation. So, if I do not accept my reputation, says Jesus, from human beings, but I know that you do not have the love of God in you. I've come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. If another comes in his own name, you will accept him. How can you believe when you accept your reputation from one another and do not seek the reputation that comes from the one alone who is God? Make sense? Follow that? Allison's use of reputation in the place of glory helps us to understand that we seek our reputations by being noticed, by being noted by others, right? The question is, who is that other that I depend on to be noticed by? Who is that other that I depend on to be noticed by? John chapter 5, Jesus plainly says that if you depend on one another for your reputations and not the one who alone is God, it's folly. It's folly. Gospel reading that Tom read this morning from Luke chapter 14 is all about reputation. Let's set the context first. Jesus gets an invitation to come to the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath for a Sabbath meal. It seems rather odd that a leader of the Pharisees, a group of Jewish religious leaders who were often the target of Jesus' scorn and ridicule and anger, would invite Jesus to a meal at his house. Maybe the Pharisees felt, well, you know what, Jesus has this reputation, and he's well known enough that I'd better invite him for a meal, even if I don't particularly like him personally. Or maybe it was a matter of vanity for the Pharisee. Look who I got. Look who I invited to my house for lunch. It's Jesus. Aren't I special? But maybe the last part of that first verse of our reading might give us a clue as to exactly what's happening here. It says that Jesus was invited to the house of a leading Pharisee, a leader of the Pharisees, on the Sabbath for a meal, and they were watching him closely. They were watching him closely. Maybe they were watching him because they admired him. They were watching Jesus because, oh, he's a great guy. But I suspect that they were more likely watching him to see if they could find a weakness, right? Something that they could blame him for. Something that would turn the guests and the crowds against Jesus. Well, if they were watching Jesus, Jesus doesn't disappoint. Once he arrives at the house, he sees a man who has dropsy. In our medical language today, we would call that edema, fluid retention. It's the Sabbath, though, remember? And remember from last week, people got all mad at Jesus for curing because it was healing, because it was work, considered work, right? So this time, Jesus asks his host first whether or not it's lawful to cure on the Sabbath. What do you think? Is it lawful to heal someone on the Sabbath? Well, the Pharisees and the others must have gotten wind of what took place in the synagogue earlier, because no one dares to say anything to Jesus. So in their silence, Jesus heals the man and sends him on his way. But you know what? That's just the preliminaries, right? We're just setting the table here. Now the real fun starts. I get the sense that Jesus must have had a great sense of humor and a sense of occasion. Right? He must have understood what was happening. There he is at the home of the leader of the Pharisees, surrounded by the who's who of the town. Right? Everybody that's important in that town is there. The meal is about to start. The guests are jockeying for position. Right? They're looking who's going to sit where. It's all about reputation. Who would dare sit close to the head of the table? It's all about reputation. Those whose reputations were the highest, the best, those who were held in the highest esteem would take their seats in the places of honor, and then the others would sort of fall into place. But Jesus then tells them a parable. Look, when you get invited to a banquet, don't choose those seats in the places of honor, because if someone more distinguished than you shows up, then the host would have to tell you to move, and then you would be disgraced, right? Your reputation would be in tatters. Instead, he says, choose the lowest place, so that your host will see you and say, hey, you don't belong there. Come with me while I move you up. And then your reputation would be enhanced. If you really want to know what people think of you, look for your name on the seating chart of a wedding reception. You know what I'm talking about, right? You go to the wedding reception hall, and there's that big chart. It's got all the tables and all the names of the people that are seated at these tables. And you scan for your name, starting with table 1, table 2, table 8. Still can't find your name. There you are, table 14. You know, you look for where are these tables located in relation to the head table, and who's seated at the same table with you. It can be a bit of a humbling experience to find your name at a table whose view of the head table is blocked by a pillar, and whose table mates are people that you've never met, and who delightfully include people with their young children. I find it odd that Jesus would spend time telling a parable about how to enhance your reputation. I mean, it just seems like a matter of manners, right? First century Emily Post. Why would Jesus comment on an issue like this? Don't sit at the head of the table, sit at the lowest places so that the host will take you up, right? It doesn't really make sense unless he's making a point that's not so obvious. I think the first part of what Jesus was saying would have been received reasonably well. A guest would have said, good point, Jesus. Well said. We should seek to be humble, or at least pretend to be humble, so that others can know how humble we truly are. Reminds me of a school friend back in my elementary school years who really didn't quite understand the concept of humility. I said to him one day, "You're so humble." And he said to me, "I know." But the guests at that meal would have had no reason to be offended or upset by the words of Jesus around table matters, right? It makes sense. But I think it's a setup. Now that he's got the attention of the guests, who think that Jesus just might be a wise sage, an interesting and appropriate party guest, now that he's got their confidence, he lowers the boom. And his next words are loaded, and they fall like rocks in a mirror factory. Listen, says Jesus to his host, this leader of the Pharisees. When you give a luncheon like this, or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your family, or your rich neighbors, because they will invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the the lame, and the blind. They can't repay you. They can't repay you, but you'll be blessed. You'll be blessed. And when he says that, you can kind of hear the air go out of the room, right? All these people, all of this energy of being in the right place with the right people is rapidly dissipating. Don't invite your family or your friends or your rich neighbors. Who do you think's there for lunch that day? Right? Who do you think is there for lunch? The families and the friends and the rich neighbors of the Pharisee begin to look at each other. They start to shuffle their feet a bit uncomfortably. Jesus knows the game that they're playing. If I invite you, then you invite me. It's a quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. We burnish each other's reputations because we're seen with the right people in the right places, doing the right sort of things. It's all so neat and tidy. And Jesus says, forget all that. Forget all that. You think these little parties are for enhancing your reputations. Did I see you at the party at, Smith? Oh, yeah. And did I see you at the little soiree that the Wangs were giving? Oh, yeah, I did, didn't I? You think I'm sort of some sort of advice giver, telling you to sit in the lower places so that you get moved up to the higher places. No, says Jesus, that's really not what I'm about. When you throw a party, invite the homeless. Invite the homeless. Invite the outcasts, the marginalized. Invite the unclean, the unwanted. Invite those who make you uncomfortable. Invite those who can't help your reputation. Invite those who can't help your reputation. Those who can't pay you back. The reputation that you think you're building by hanging out with all the right people, doing all the right kind of things in front of everybody, pretending to be humble so that others can point out what a great guy you are. That sort of reputation. None of that really matters, says Jesus. There's only one person who can give you a reputation that truly matters, and that one person is God. It's God. And let's be really clear here. The reputation that God gives isn't what you think it is. God has an awful reputation. God has an awful reputation. Think about that. God has an awful reputation. Think about that. Jesus says that you should invite to your party the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Basically, the lowest of the low. Those whose circumstances were believed in those days were being caused by their own sin, or the sin of their parents, right? They were responsible for their condition. This God of Jesus came with those people with the lowest and the worst reputations. Those who others intentionally shunned and avoided. And in this culture, the culture of Jesus, your reputation mattered more than just about anything. Jesus says, if you want to receive your reputation from God, you've got to be prepared to lose the reputation that comes from the mutually reinforcing opinion and high regard of those who are bulwarks of public morality and goodness. And you need to find your reputation among those who are held as nothing, as those of no worth. And what he's saying to his host, what he's saying to the leader of the Pharisees is that your guest list is all wrong. Your guest list is all wrong. And you can now picture those who have been shuffling their feet uncomfortably start to head for the exits. Jesus' words weren't easy to hear in that day, those many years ago. And really, they're not that easy for us to hear today either. Right? They're not that easy for us to hear today either. People say that they admire Jesus. But how many truly follow him? People say that they admire Jesus, but how many truly follow him? People say that they respect Jesus, but apparently that respect or that admiration isn't enough to truly put into action what Jesus teaches. When it comes to reputation, most people, that includes most of us, still seek the approval and regard of others like us. Right? That's our reputation. We seek the approval and the regard of others like us more than I think we seek the approval of God, the reputation that's given to us by God. But when we listen to Jesus and his words, that if we move beyond the egocentric hypocrisy of a fake humility and self-interest, to truly open our hearts and in our homes, in our places of worship, to those whose circumstances might trouble us or might even disgust us, Jesus says, we'll be blessed because they can't repay you, and you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. When we listen to Jesus, we begin to understand that the only reputation that truly matters, the only reputation that has any lasting value, is the one that is given to us by God. It's the one that is given to us by God. Humility isn't a game to be played to reach the higher places, to be commended by others. It's a way of life that will follow the example of the one whose reputation is absolutely terrible by the world's standards and practice. Even though people say they admire Jesus, they don't follow him. They don't live like him. They don't love like him. People can say that they like Jesus all they want, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything because it's not real to them. I like Jesus, he's a great guy. But if it doesn't mean anything to you, what are your words worth? If it's real to us, then we need to be ready maybe to be called out as fools for Christ, right? As fools for Christ, remembering that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. Would we live like this? Would we love like this? Is this the reputation we want? The author and teacher Tony Campolo tells a true story about a time when he was traveling. He was in another time zone and he couldn't sleep. So well after midnight, he wandered down to a local donut shop where it turns out local prostitutes also came at the end of their night of turning tricks. And he overheard a conversation between two of them. One named Agnes said, "You know what? Tomorrow's my birthday. I'm going to be 39. And her friend snapped back, "So what do you want from me? A birthday party, huh? You want me to get a cake and sing happy birthday to you?" And the first woman, Agnes, replied back, "Look, come on. Why do you have to be so mean? Why do you have to put me down? I'm just saying it's my birthday. I don't want anything from you. I mean, why should I have a birthday party? I've never had a birthday party. In my whole life, why should I have one now?" When they left, Tony got an idea. He asked the donut shop owner if Agnes came in every night. And when the owner replied in the affirmative, Tony invited him into a surprise party conspiracy. The shop owner's wife even got involved. And together they arranged for a cake, candles, and typical party decorations for Agnes, who was, to Tony, a complete stranger. The next night, when she came in, all of the guests that were there shouted, "Surprise!" And Agnes couldn't believe her eyes. The donut shop patron sang happy birthday, and she began to cry so hard that she could barely blow out the candles. When the time came to cut the cake, she asked whether they would mind if she didn't cut it. If she could just take it home, just keep it for a while, and savor the moment. So she left, carrying her cake like a treasure. And then Tony led the guests in a prayer for Agnes. After which the shop owner told Tony he didn't realize that Tony was a preacher. And he asked, "What kind of church do you come from?" And Tony replied, "I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning." And the shop owner replied, "No, you don't. No, you don't. There ain't no church like that. If there was, I'd join it. Yeah, I would join a church like that." What kind of reputation do you want? What kind of reputation do we want as a church? If our reputation is that of just another church, just another group of like-minded, well-mannered, reasonable people, I wonder what the attraction would be for such a church in a culture where people don't already hold much of an opinion about churches in the first place. What would be so compelling about a church whose reputation is entirely predictable, predictably safe? But a church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning, well now, that's a church worth thinking about. That's the kind of church worth talking about. This fall, I want to talk over the next few coming weeks about Richmond Presbyterian Church being a community that will go deep with God and wide with the world. That's our motto, by the way, if you don't know. Deep with God, wide with the world. But do we really want to be a people, a church, whose reputation will be that of a people who will go wide, very wide with the world? If we want that sort of reputation, we'll probably need to go very, very deep with God first, right? The world doesn't need more churches whose reputations are given by others, even by other churches. Hey, did you hear about Richmond Presbyterian Church? What a nice group of people. What the world needs are more churches whose reputations are given by God. Because we'll be the kind of church that isn't about furnishing our own credentials, but that will be the kind of church that will welcome and serve those who have no credentials of their own. And you know what? If it's going to happen here in this place, it's got to happen here in this place first. In each of us first. You know, in our context, in the culture, the context in which we live, where we hear so many stories of racism ongoing. I don't have to tell you, you know what they are. Classism, sexism, tokenism. We're surrounded by the fear of the other, hatred of those who are different from us. When all of that is still so prevalent, will we open our lives to those who are different from us? We open our lives to those whose reputations are really bad, who can't help our reputations? Will we engage with those who can't do anything to repay us? Because, you know, people who will open their hearts and their lives to that sort of reputation are probably the ones who will make the greatest impact for the gospel, because that means our foolishness will be noticed. That means that we just can't blend in with everyone else. But that recognition comes at a price. You know, our world needs people who will do more than just say that we admire Jesus. Our world needs people who will live in ways that put the words of Jesus into practice. Our world needs churches who will welcome those who aren't welcomed anywhere else, who will love those who are difficult to love, and whose reputation doesn't come from seeking the approval of others, but is granted by God alone. As we go deep with God and wide with the world, friends, I pray that we would be the kind of church that isn't interested in the approval of others as much as we're interested in following the ways of Jesus, and the reputation that then is bestowed by God alone on those who do. God be with us and bless us. Amen.